Hello, this is a quick and dirty tutorial on how to use Burp Suite Professional to do an automated test of a website or a web application. Note that I'm talking about Burp Suite Professional here. That's the version that you have to buy. There is a free version that comes with Kali Linux and you can download from their website, but it doesn't have the important features you need as a web security testing professional. Now before we get started, I should mention the usual disclaimer. Before you do any security testing of any target of assessment, you must get yourself written permission from the owner. That's your get out of jail free card. If someone accuses you of hacking and the police show up at your door, you can demonstrate that you had permission to do what you were doing. Note also that just the permission from the owner is sometimes not enough. If it's cloud-based or hosted on an external ISP, make sure that the site owner has the permission of the host to also test. Also, if possible, see if you can test a non-production version of the website. With non-production, you don't have to tiptoe around, you don't have to be quite as careful about knocking the thing offline or affecting the data in the database. Sometimes it's not possible, but if you can, non-production, a QA version, a pre-release, whatever they've got available. Now, if you've used other web testing tools, a lot of the automated testing tools out there, you just put in a URL and you press a great big shiny button that says scan, and it goes off and does its thing. Well, if you've been playing around with Burp at all, you'll know that it's a little bit different. Burp is an intercepting proxy. It sits in between your web browser and the website that you want to test. It's set up as an HTTP/HTTPS proxy, and you just change the settings in your browser, and it captures all the information as it goes by and tests it that way. You start off using Burp by manually crawling the website, clicking on links, clicking on all of the menu items, and that shows Burp the site layout. And then once it's got the site layout, you can tell it to go and do an automated test in the background. Go off, have a coffee, go have lunch while it does its thing. When it's finished testing, you'll get a nice scanner report like this. I really like the Burp report. It's nice and colorful. It has a nice executive summary at the top and more than enough detail. Okay, what are we going to talk about in this tutorial? The first step is preparation, getting your browser ready, getting Burp ready. The next step is browsing that website, the web application manually by clicking on links, clicking on menu items with Burp set up as an intercepting proxy in the background. Once you're done that, Burp should have a fairly good idea of the sitemap, of where all the URLs are. It may have discovered some new ones though, so we're going to go and do a second step to have it actively scan any new URLs that it found in the background. Once that's done, we'll review all of the findings. Burp does allow you to adjust levels of criticality, mark false positives, and adjust things before you send them out to a report, unlike a lot of other tools. Then you will save the report, and optionally you can save all of the session data, so you can load it back into Burp at a future date and revise everything again or print out more reports. The preparation stage. The first thing you need to do is set your web browser to use Burp as a proxy server. Once you've done that, we'll go into Burp and tell it what our target URL or URLs are that you're allowed to test. We don't want Burp to go off and start scanning all of Google or all of Microsoft. We'll change some settings in Burp. Burp has an active scanner. We'll set this active scanner to test what's in scope only. It has a passive scanner. We'll set that to test everything. And we'll turn on the Burp Spider. Spider is Burp's crawler, its web crawler, and we'll have it spider as you browse. So while you're manually browsing the website, the spider will be going along behind you, trying to find additional URLs and hidden resources and adding them to the list of things to test. For this tutorial, I'm going to use Firefox as my web browser. You can use Chrome, you can use Internet Explorer, anything that you like. I find though that Firefox gives me the best combination of configurable settings and a whole bunch of really handy web security testing add-ons that you can download that make the job of testing web applications a whole lot easier. Speaking of add-ons, Burp, as I said, is a intercepting proxy. So you need to set up your web browser to use Burp as its HTTP/HTTPS proxy. If you're doing web application testing a lot, you're going to find that you need to turn the proxy settings on, turn them off, change from one proxy to another quite a lot. If you're using Firefox, there are a number of proxy changing add-ons that you can get. This is the best one that I've found though, Proxy Selector. It's really simple. It does exactly what it claims to do. No fuss, no muss, doesn't try to automate anything. It's a great tool, and you can have as many proxy settings as you want. A word about what we're going to test. For this tutorial, I went to the OWASP Broken Web Applications project page. They have a virtual machine there that runs under VMware or other virtual environments that you can download, and it has a number of purposely vulnerable web applications. Of those, I picked this one to test. It's Cyclone. It's written in Ruby on Rails, I guess. It pretends to be some money transfer application. It's pretty simple, but it's a good enough target for this tutorial, and that's what we'll be focusing on. To set your browser settings, Burp by default listens on localhost 127.0.0.1 port 8080. So this is what you'll need to set in your browser proxy settings. Burp is an HTTP/HTTPS proxy, not a SOX proxy. So basically the settings that you see here are what you need to set up. And here we are in Burp. The first time you see the Burp user interface, it is a little intimidating. But don't worry, after you've used it a little bit, how it works and where everything is will become very clear. Now, before we can start testing, we need to set up Burp. The first step in setting up Burp is to tell it what URLs it's allowed to test with its active scanner. To do that, we'll click on the Target tab and the Scope subtab. In here, we need to put in regular expressions of all the URLs that we are allowed to actively test. Regular expressions, you're thinking, oh no, those are ugly, those are hard. Well, don't worry, Burp has you covered. Just copy the URL of the site or sites that you want to test into your clipboard and press Paste URL. Burp will convert it into the proper regular expression format for you. If your site is on multiple URLs, just repeat this process. You can also copy them and change them. For example, some websites are published both on HTTP and on HTTPS. So in that case, you could put in a second entry here and then manually change it. To change items in Burp dialogues, it's pretty much the same no matter where you go in the application. You highlight what you want to change, and then you press Edit if there's an Edit button. Up pops a dialog that lets you make the changes that you want. So I'm going to change the protocol to HTTPS. Host or IP range is okay. Port number needs to change though. We'll change that to 443. And I believe everything else is correct. Click OK, and there we go. Now I have Burp set up to test my web application both on HTTP and on HTTPS. Okay, now we've got our scope defined. Let's go and set up Burp Scanner. Click on the Scanner tab and the Live Scanning subtab. Burp has two ways of doing automated scanning: active scanning, passive scanning. Active scanning, it actually goes out to the website and does SQL injection, cross-site scripting, things like that. Very important to set this setting to use the suite scope, as defined in Target tab, which we just did. That way Burp will not actively test any website other than what you have given it permission to test. Live passive scanning is a different story. Passive scanning just watches stuff as it goes by, looking for vulnerabilities. For example, Say the web application is pulling in a jQuery JavaScript library from a third-party website somewhere out on the internet. Now, we can't actively test that third-party site, but because our in-scope application is pulling a JavaScript library from it, it could be affected by a vulnerability in that library. Say it's out of date. Passive scanning is designed to test things like that and discover vulnerabilities just by things going by. So out-of-date version numbers, a whole bunch of things can be discovered with passive scanning. So it's safe to set this one to scan everything. Okay, now that we've told Burp what it's allowed to scan, let's look at some of the options to see how it's going to scan. On this page, generally the defaults are okay, with a few very minor exceptions. And by the way, speaking of defaults, anytime you go to a section on a Burp settings page and you're not sure whether it's in the default state, you can click this little arrow button here. That will set that section, and just that section, back to the defaults for Burp. For this section, active insertion points, I think the defaults are okay. We don't need to mess around with those. Let's scroll down and see what else there is. Active scanning engine is the next section. Number of threads determines how many simultaneous requests it's going to make to your target websites. 10 is usually okay. However, depending on the website, that might be too many. So you may have to experiment to adjust with that number, as with any web testing tool. One option that's not the default that I do like to turn on is this one, throttle between requests. And you can set it to 100 milliseconds and add random variations. I find that even if a website can handle 10 simultaneous requests, some web servers still get overloaded if it doesn't get a break in between them. So turn this on. It makes the test run a little tiny bit slower, but nothing so much that you would actually notice it. For active scanning options, active scanning optimization, leave those as the defaults. Active scanning areas, there are some things down here that you can change to make the testing go a little bit faster. If you know what type of database is behind the scenes on the website, you can customize it. So if it is an Oracle SQL server in the back end, you can turn off the other types so that we'll focus just on Oracle specific attacks. If you don't know what's behind there, and in this case the target that I'm testing is Ruby on Rails, I'm really not sure what's in the back end, so I'm going to leave all three turned on. Again, the defaults are all good. And we're going to go down to the passive scanning areas. Passive scanning areas, there's only one option that I've ever turned off on here, and that's this one, ASP.NET View State. If you know the website that you're testing does not have any ASP.NET, so you can safely turn that one off. Final option is static code analysis. I would leave this one at the default. Okay, our scanner is all set up. Now we need to configure Burp Spider. Click on the Spider tab and the Control subtab. Burp Spider is its web crawler, and we do want it to be working. So the first thing is we're going to turn the Spider on. By default, the Spider is paused. We're going to turn it on. For Spider Scope, make sure that it is set to Suite Scope, because we don't want the Spider going off and crawling all of Google or all of Microsoft now, do we? Under the Options tab, the defaults are generally okay. The one to make sure that you have checked is this one, Passively Spider as you browse. The first step of using Burp, we're going to manually browse the website through our web browser, and the Burp Spider will follow along behind us, crawling around, trying to find URLs and resources that we can't get at through the user interface. The next options deal with form submissions. If the Spider finds a form, it by default will try to submit the form or ask you what to do about it. In this particular case, we're going to be submitting the forms manually, so we don't want the Spider to do it. So I'm going to pick the option Don't Submit Forms under Form Submission. A little bit further down, there's a similar section, only this is for login forms, login pages. The default is to ask you what to do whenever it encounters a login page. Again, we're going to do this manually, so I'm going to set it to don't submit login forms. Then it won't bother us. The final settings on the page deal with how many threads the spider should use. Again, it has a setting for throttle between requests. I like to turn that on. 100 milliseconds or higher. And the rest of the options you can leave as the defaults. One more thing that we need to configure. Remember that Burp is an intercepting proxy. Let's go to the Proxy tab and look at the Intercept sub-tab. By default, this is on, Intercept. This means that every request from the web browser and every reply from the web application gets stopped by Burp so that you can look at it and maybe change things before sending it on. We're just going to do basic automated testing for this example, so I'm going to turn Intercept off. And that's it. That's all the settings that we need to change in Burp. Now we can get to actual testing of the application. Alright, let's look at browsing the application. To browse the application, once you have Burp set up, you exercise the web application with your browser. Click every link, submit every form you find. You can just put in dummy data to begin with, that's okay. One word of caution though, watch out for web forms that will cause your client grief. The most common example of this is webmail forms. A webmail form, you fill it out, and all it does is in the background on the server sends an email message to somebody. Well, the way that automated web testers work is they will submit the form hundreds of times, hundreds of thousands of times. I had one assessment where I had a web tool find one of these webmail forms, and the person came in the next morning and had 1 million unread email messages in their inbox. If possible, have the client identify forms like that ahead of time so that you can mark them and exclude them from automated testing and test them manually. If you test them manually, they're still going to get email, but they're going to get 10, 20, 50, not a million. Now we're going to manually crawl the website through our browser. Why do we do this? Why don't we just do it like other web testing tools and have it crawl the website? More and more websites are using a lot of JavaScript in the client side, and traditional web crawlers can miss some of the links and the resources. So the approach that we're taking with Burp is we're going to manually crawl it first, clicking on everything that we can find before we let Burp's spider try to find other URLs in the back end. So let's do that. Every menu item, just exercise it, open it up, wait for the page to load, and on each page, if you see links, click on the links if they're in scope. So here's a link, for example, I can see down at the status line. This takes me to an out-of-scope website. No point in clicking on that. Here's a mail to link, which will just open up my local email client to send an email. So there's no point in clicking on that one either. Let's see what else we can find. Here's a help screen. I'm not seeing any links here. Oh, there's one. No, that's not a link. Again, just go through the web pages one by one and see what you can find for links that are in scope. Here's an interesting one. This is a link that looks like it's going to a PDF file. Now, PDF files are probably not going to be tested for web application vulnerabilities. This is probably just a link to a static file. However, it's really hard to tell. Some applications, it looks like it's linking to a static file like a PDF, but in reality it builds it on the fly on the back end. So if it's in scope, even if I think it's not a web file that's going to pull up, I will click it just so the link gets tested anyway. So we'll go through the whole site like this, finding as many things as we can. And when we get to forms, when you see a form, go ahead and submit it. You can put some junk information in there if you think it's safe to do so. Burp will capture the post or whatever operation happens in behind the scenes so that it can test that operation as well. Many vulnerabilities only show up when a form is actually posted back to the web application. I see a link here for sign up, so I'm going to pick that one as well. Sign up. Doesn't really matter what you put in the forms. Valid information is preferable, though, to complete junk. Okay, so I'm going to continue cruising around in this website to see what links I can find, see if I have covered everything, and once I'm done, I'm going to hop back over to Burp. We're done manually crawling the website. Now let's go back and see how Burp is making out. Back in Burp, if you click on Scanner and the Scan Queue subtab, you'll get a progress report of the active scanning of the web application. And here I can see it has decided to test 8 URLs. Here they are. And look, it's already finished testing all of them. Guess I shouldn't have gone for that pizza. We see that it has already found issues on some of the URLs. Some of them are colored red, so I'll bet you that means that they're more important than the ones that are colored sort of this black-gray color. This is how many requests Burp sent to that URL to try to find issues. And over here in insertion points, if you're wondering what that is, that's the inputs in the web application. This can mean something as simple as an HTML form field input, but it can also include the cookies accepted by the web application and even HTTP header information. Burp tests all of these things. Now looking at the scan queue, you may be wondering, hey, there's only 8 URLs. But that web application looked bigger. There should be more URLs in here. Where's all the rest of it? Good question. So if you remember, we did set the Burp spider to active so that it would crawl along behind us and maybe find some new URLs. Let's go over to the spider tab, click on Control, and see what happened. Spider is still running, and it did make some requests. And down here, this is an important value to look at, requests queued. When it's at 0, it means that the spider has followed every link that it could find and has done its job. It's sitting there idle right now, so it's no longer crawling the site. It's done. So where do we see the results? In Burp, your results are almost always on the target sitemap page. And look at that. Now the sitemap has been built up. It's showing a list of all of the websites and all of the URLs that the web browser or the web application reached out to. The ones in gray are out of scope. They may have been passively scanned, but they wouldn't have been actively scanned. Over here on the right-hand side, we can see a summary of the list of issues discovered by Burp's active scanner, active or passive scanner, actually. And down below, you can see a description of each item. Click up here, and you'll see a nice clear description down here. Let's go over to the sitemap again and open it up. Here's our target. It's that IP address and the /cyclone subdirectory. And here are some directories. I think some of these are new. I don't remember seeing any of these. I don't remember clicking on these myself. So I think the spider has done its job in finding some new URLs. But why didn't it put them in the Burp queue for active scanning? Well, the spider just does spidering. It doesn't actually submit anything for testing. That's your job. So we're going to do that right now. And that's the next step in the process. After you've manually crawled the website and the spider has a queue of 0, you can go over here to your target, click at the top level of your target URL. In this case, it's not the IP address, but it's /cyclone. And in Burp, right-click. When in doubt in Burp, right-click, and you'll usually get a menu. So you can see some options here. Spider this branch. We could tell the spider to go and crawl the whole site again, but I think that's already been done. we're going to pick this option, actively scan this branch. Pick that and see what happens. Up pops the active scanning wizard, which lets us select which URLs we want to have added to the active scan queue. The first option is remove duplicate items. 3 items to remove. Okay, that sounds good. We'll leave that on. Remove items already scanned. Items with the same URL and parameters. 3 items. So stuff that has already been scanned by the active scanner, I don't think we need to test it again. Remove items with no parameters. 163 items. This one you probably want to leave off. You do want to test items with no parameters. Because in Burp, when it thinks of parameters, it's generally thinking of URL parameters up on the URL line. But it's not thinking of HTTP headers, cookies, things like that. So we'll leave this option turned off so it includes items with no parameters. The next item that we can choose is remove items with the following extensions: JavaScript, GIF, JPEG, PNG, CSS. Generally, it's okay to remove those, but it depends on your web application. You might want to take a look at your web application. Sometimes JavaScript files are active. Sometimes CSS files are active. And there can be other types. For example, maybe there are BMP images. Maybe you don't want it to test PDF files. You can add these to the list as appropriate for the target that you're testing. Let's click the next button. Burp now lists, okay, here are all the URLs that I'm going to send to the scanner queue. And we can scroll down these and look, there's a whole bunch that are new ones here. All these user ones with a number. Those are interesting. Burp lets you edit this list. So these user ones, I bet you a lot of these are redundant. They're probably the same page, just for a different user, so this have all the same inputs and all the same vulnerabilities. If you wanted to speed things up, you could say remove, and remove all but a few of those. You can do any other optimizations you want here. Okay, so this is what we're going to tell Burp to test. Click the OK button, and you might notice here the Scanner tab has lit up. Anytime there's activity in any of Burp's modules, the tab will light up briefly. Let's click on the Scanner tab, look at the scan queue, and aha, look at this. There is a bunch more stuff added to the queue to be tested. And Burp is happily making requests to each of the URLs and testing each one. If we go back to the target sitemap page and right-click on our URL, you'll notice we can also pick passively scan this branch. So that's a good option to pick. Let's pick that. Again, the Scanner tab will light up, and you might see some new URLs showing up in the list. We've got a pretty long list here. So at this point, I'm just going to wait and let Burp Scanner do its job, and we'll come back and check on it later. Let's take a closer look at the issues that Burp has found and how to work with those. On the target sitemap page, you can see the structure of the web application you're testing, and on the right-hand side, a list of the issues found so far. These are issues found by the scanners, either the active or the passive scanner. At the top is the name of the issue and how many occurrences. Down below, we have a nice description. Burp is really nice in describing the issues. The write-ups are generally pretty understandable. It has what the issue is, how to fix it, the URLs involved. At the top of each issue, you're going to see a severity, whether Burp thinks it's high, medium, low, informational. And here's something that most web testing tools don't have. That's confidence. Most other web testing tools, whenever they find something, they present it as an absolute certainty. But we all know that these web testing tools, they all get false positives. Burp is at least honest enough to say in its findings, I'm really confident that this is correct, or I don't know, I only have some information, you need to check it out further. That's what this confidence means. It's a great feature of Burp. To see more information, go up on the issues list and expand it, and you'll see the individual URLs. When you click on one of the URLs down below, you'll see two new tabs appear. One is for request. It shows you the literal HTTP and HTML that was sent from the web browser to the web application as a request. And response, what came back. You might notice down here in the lower right hand corner it says 2 highlights. When Burp finds something, it will highlight where in the text it thinks the issue lives. So I could scroll down here and try to find the highlighted text, or I can use these arrow keys. This arrow key is move to next match. Click it and it will take you to the first highlighted section. Alright, so this issue that I'm looking at is password field with autocomplete enabled. Okay, so Burp has highlighted this in the HTML for some reason. Okay, it's a form input and the site is not HTTPS. So, okay, that's a form input. Fantastic. Why does it think that it has a password? Let's click the arrow key to move to the next match. Now we can see. Now we can see. Here it's highlighting an input field, and look, it's type password. So Burp has taken these two things together and in its rule set figured out, hey, this must mean that there's a password field with autocomplete enabled. And sure enough, I don't see any of the tags to turn off autocomplete. So that looks pretty good. So you can review each of the findings, and you should review each of the findings, especially the ones that are not certain, to see if you agree with what Burp thinks is the issue. If you do find something that's categorized incorrectly, you can right-click and change many of the issues. For example, say that this particular finding was a false positive. I can go here and pick false positive, and the status will change. So Burp lets you edit the findings. A lot of tools, they don't let you edit the findings. This is fantastic. You can also change the confidence. You can delete the issue entirely. Burp gives you pretty good control over what will wind up in the report. So we have our issues, we're done testing the web application, and we've reviewed the findings for accuracy. Now, how do we write this out to a report? Go over to the Target Sitemap tab and click on the URL of what you want to report on. And right-click. In Burp, when in doubt, right-click. If you go down to near to the bottom, you'll see this one, Issues. Report issues for this host. That starts another wizard and will take you through step by step, writing out the report to an HTML file format. You can write it out as XML if you have something that will import those results. HTML is usually what you want. You can tell it what sections you want to have in the report. The defaults are almost always what you want. And you can specify how much detail you want to include. Again, the defaults are usually what you want. Include an extract of the request and the response. You can include the whole thing, but most clients don't care to see the entire thing. And finally, here are all the issues. You have a final choice to turn ones off that you don't want to appear in the report, but generally you'll want everything to appear. Click Next, give it a file name. And it writes it out in HTML file format. And the report title, this is what will show up in your browser window in the title bar. I like to give it a descriptive test. Specifically, I like to say what I was testing. Let's see, what was this one called? Cyclone. And this was an unauthenticated test. And it was my first one. Okay, that will give me some clue about what this report is for. Again, all of the details are usually what you want. Click Next, and it will write the report out. And very quickly, this is what the report looks like when you load it in a browser. It's got a nice summary page with pretty colors and bar graphs and a table of contents showing you each issue that it has found and the URLs affected. Everything's contained in one HTML file. There's no separate CSS, no separate images. Everything's all in one, so it makes it very easy to archive and move around. You don't have to drag a whole bunch of separate files around. The information that you see in each issue is exactly what you see in the Burp windows. All of the text for describing the issue, how to fix it, external references, and then when you look at each individual URL, you will see highlighting showing where the attack was and where in the response it thinks it found the issue. One last thing that you should do. We have our report written out. All of our testing is done in Burp. Let's save all of the data though so that we can load it back into Burp in a future date. To do that, go to Burp, Save State. It takes you to the Save State wizard where you can pick various options. You can choose to save just the in-scope items only. As with most things in Burp, the defaults are pretty good, and until you know better, just pick the defaults. Give it a file name. Burp by default doesn't force any particular file extension on you. So I like to give my files a descriptive name. This is on-auth testing. It's the first one. And I like to pick .burp as my file extension. That's unofficial. It's not enforced in any way. Just for my own use, that tells me that, hey, this is a Burp data file. All it's doing is using the Java serialization function here. To learn more about Burp, this is the book you need to get. The Web Application Hacker's Handbook, 2nd edition, is the current one. This was written by one of the authors of Burp Suite. So not only is it a really good reference for all of the web vulnerabilities and how to test each one, but it's written from a Burp point of view. All of the examples show how to test the vulnerabilities it describes using Burp as your tool. Highly recommended. Go pick up a copy. And that is it. That's how you use Burp Suite Professional to do an automated test of a website or web application. Quick review of the steps. First, prepare your web browser to use Burp as its intercepting proxy, and set up the various configuration options in Burp for scanning, for crawling, and the site scope. Then in your web browser, you'll manually browse the website, clicking on links, submitting forms. Once that's done, go back into Burp and tell it to actively scan remaining URLs from the sitemap display. Once all of Burp's scanning is done, you can go in and review the findings. You can adjust levels of criticality. Anything that's a false positive, you can mark it as such. Great feature of Burp. Save the report out to an HTML file, and optionally, but recommended, save all of the data to a .burp file so you can load it back into Burp later. Thanks very much for watching. Happy testing.